Good evening. It's the wise servant here, Mr. Solace. All praises to the horizon. Peace and wisdom. Now this evening I want to do this video called Ifriqiya. And you can call this Old Africa. Ifriqiya. And in me explaining this to you guys, it should help many of you that believe you are Moors. It should give you a clear perspective of what Moor or the Moorish people are. And I want to give you guys a little history or wisdom on the tall whites as well, because this all plays a part into it. See, we don't understand indigenous and civilized man. And so it's very deep. A lot of you guys claim nationalities, claim to be a Moor, or this nationality, that nationality. And then at the same time, you'd claim to be indigenous. And so you have to grasp, any nationality you know of, it is no longer indigenous. It is civilized. That's why it has a nationality attached. That's a civilized thing. And so you have to grasp, indigenous men, they do not live in that way. And so I want to explain. Now you had a place known as Ifriqiya, if I'm pronouncing it right. I-F-R-I-Q-I-Y-A, Ifriqiya. And this was like old Africa, meaning before the Africa that you guys know, which would be the whole continent called Africa. Ifriqiya was just a few countries in North Africa and along the west as well. And so I want you guys to grasp. Now this was around 700 AD to 900 AD. And so like I said, Ifriqiya was just a few countries in today's Africa, in the north and along the west somewhat. Now, this place, Ifriqiya, was a part of the Roman Empire. So you have to grasp, this was a colonizing thing, meaning you had indigenous men all over Africa, or what we call that continent now. You had indigenous men all running around there. And so this is why when it's begin to be named, meaning those few countries in Africa that were conquered by the Romans are white people. And so this is the beginnings, you can say. Now before this you had Africa, but it was a Roman Empire thing, meaning it was under, what is his name? Scipio Africanus. He was basically the proconsul. And so that was just their orders of rule in the past. Meaning you had the consul, and this was the highest. And then under that, I guess you can say you had proconsuls, which is like under bosses or under leaders in other places. And so like if you colonize a place, you don't go there, but you send your proconsul. And so he will be the leader there for you under, you know, the Roman thing. And so I'm just giving you guys a little perspective. Now, this was like in the 100s AD. So before you had Ifriqiya, you had, let's say, 2 or 3 countries in Africa that was first conquered by the Roman Empire. And so Scipio Africanus, he kind of ran them. He was the proconsul for the Roman Empire in what we know as Africa today. And then, of course, as time goes on, you know, people fighting over these areas. Then you get Ifriqiya. This is just more lands, you can say. Now, the people that were indigenous to these lands that were being taken over, they were known as the Berber people, or the Amazian people. And so I want you guys to grasp, those people were basically displaced, civilized, you know. Those that were sent to Europe, they were called Moors by the Europeans. And so, of course, over time, mind you, this is 200 AD. In up. And so, over time, as they're, in Europe, they begin to be called the Maori. Now, you have to remember, indigenous men don't have nationality. So if you claim to be a Moor, you are not claiming the indigenous men, but you are claiming what is after. Meaning, after the indigenous men are killed off and civilized, are domesticated, because that's truly what the difference is, but I'll explain. Once that happens, then you get, a people called a thing. Meaning, if I live by nationality, so I'm going to label y'all something, some kind of name. And so once the men are civilized and they learn my way, so they call themselves what I call them. If you confused, we call ourselves North Americans. I mean, African Americans. We didn't make that up. But the indigenous people that were here, of course, over time they were civilized out. And so they took on the language and the ways of those that colonized that area and civilized them out. And so you have to grasp, if you're a Moor, or you claim that, the Moors come from the Berber people. These are the indigenous people that were indigenous to Africa before the Roman or the Europeans kind of came in and conquered Africa the way they did North America, or the whole Americas. And so you kind of have to grasp, it's a deep thing. Now, like I said, over time, those Berber people, of course, they were sent to Europe and other places. But those that were in Europe, like I said, they were referred to as Maori. This is Spanish. This is before the English language. So they were referred to as Maori by the Europeans. And of course, as time goes by, of course, you get the English language. And so Spanish words are translated into English. And so that's how you get Moor. Meaning, if you're a Moor, you're just like completely lost. You claiming like, you might as well say like you're an African American. It's like no difference. It's like people were civilized out. Indigenous men were civilized out, and then hundreds of years later, they just go by what was put on them. And so you have to grasp, it's a deep thing. Now, those Berber men, which were indigenous to North Africa, and shipped to Europe, over time, they begin to be called the Maori. And of course, just like you see here in America, well, some of us that, are descendants of the slaves, well, we have money. And we ain't that low. We kind of wealthy. And so you have to grasp, those same men now, they came to North America. The whole Americas, I don't know why I keep saying North. But they came to the Americas with the Europeans. Do you get it? And so that's how that happened. Meaning, if America goes somewhere, well, you have wealthy black men. You say, man, they wasn't slaves. It's a matter of that. After, indigenous men are civilized out, so they're not going to all just be slavey. And so you have to grasp, that's what the Moorish Empire was. Basically, after those indigenous men were civilized out, over time in Europe, and they begin to get a little status, the same way you see blacks here getting status, over these hundreds of years. And so some of them, were wealthy kings in Europe and had their land in the same way you see here. Some of our blacks are wealthy. They had their maids and servants. And so they came to the New World with them. So you have to grasp, it's a matter of that. And they basically did the same things to the people of Americas that happened to their ancestors hundreds, thousands of years prior. Meaning this happened to their ancestors in the 100 ADs. the Berber people. And so now in 1492, here they are, not even realizing it. They civilized out. They don't even have a connection with the indigenous men no more. They refer to themselves as Moors or Maori. And so you have to grasp, it's just like us. We have no connection to the indigenous people that we see. Meaning y'all watch YouTube, y'all see indigenous men and the videos of how the Caucasians kind of interact with them. Y'all have no connection to them peoples. And so you have to grasp how this all works is you had indigenous men on every continent that you guys know of. North America, South America, which is just one continent. Antarctica, Australia, Eurasia, which would be, you know, all those Europes, Asia, India, those continents, Africa. All the continents that we know of. Now, there's more. Far, far north. And so I want you guys to grasp. All the continents that we know of, indigenous men were on them. This would be your light browns to dark browns. Indigenous men, like how y'all see them, and they like kind of live how they live. If you lost, pull up Sentinel Island, and you see those indigenous people. And so on every continent that we know of in today's times, you had indigenous men running around on them. In the far north, you had what is called tall whites. This is the aliens y'all talk about. This is nothing more than the ancestors of white people. But I'm going to explain how this works. Now, you had them tall whites coming from the far north, meaning past, what is that called? Past the North Pole, meaning lands y'all do not know about, being as though well, not we, but most of you guys don't fully grasp that all bodies is worlds. And so you have lands in this area, lands in this area. We live down in the thoracic area. And so North Pole would, you know, kind of be here. And then, of course, you have your lands here, your lands all up there. If you're familiar with Norse mythology, they kind of explain it perfectly with the Yggdrasil tree and how the Jotunheim kind of came down to Midgard. And so you have to grasp those tall whites that you may hear about as aliens in today. Just imagine white people twice the size that they are now. More than what you see as blonde, but like white, like chalk. The hair like the same. All kind of blend, like just white. Almost angelical looking, like snow. Like, oh man, look at them. The lips so rosy red, the eyes like violet. Kind of bluish violetish or purplish reddish. Just so white. These tall white men came from the far north down into all the continents that we know. Now, of course, they hit the farthest north continents that we know first. This would be your Norways, your Greenlands. And so those indigenous men there were mixed breeded with those tall whites or those blondes. But we talking way beyond the blonde y'all can grasp, like white. And so they mixed breed with them, civilizing them out, which is truly just a matter of domesticating. Kind of like how you do with animals. You domesticate a wolf and then you get pet dogs, and they're a little more sophisticated. So we say, meaning a civilized person. And so I want you guys to grasp, in that way, these tall whites came to every continent that we know of, hitting the farthest north ones first, you know, going over into like China and things we know like that. And so this is why every place or continent that we know of that's civilized, it's white, meaning in China, their ancestors were indigenous people. light brown to dark brown. But you see Chinese people are white skinned now. You go over to the North African countries like Morocco. They're white now. So you have to grasp this is deep. You see it in today, just like in like America. It was indigenous men here. Now the people are white. And so you have to grasp. It's a colonizing thing. But this goes way, way, way back with those tall whites. Meaning before Africa. China and these places was hit up first. Norway, Greenland, Russia. These places had indigenous people on until, that colonizing. Them tall whites coming in, mixed breeding with them. This is how you get the many different races that you see from that. From the indigenous, mixed breeding with the tall white. And then so you get all the different white people that we have today, as well as all the different brown and black people we have today. From that. So the white people you see, they are not the tall whites. They are no different than we are. Just the variety of what came from that white and that black, so to say. Meaning that tall white and that indigenous. And then so from that on every continent, you kind of get all the many shades. I apologize. You kind of get all the many shades that you see. Meaning you see white people, blonde-haired white people, red-haired white people, black-haired white people. You see light-skinned black people all the way to real black people. Black people, my complexion. You got some white people that's close to my complexion. They tan and shit. And so that's what I mean. We're all truly the same. Meaning the offsprings of that merging on every continent that was colonized. Now they hit Africa first, before Americas. And so you have to grasp, the Berber people were there. And so when the Roman Empire, you have to grasp, when the tall whites come, they colonize, then like I said, you get white people, all the different shades we know on that continent, as well as all the different shades of black people. Whatever race you fall in, you just look at yourself, white or black, like that. We have white people today, many races. We have many races of colored people. Now, just think continent, completely indigenous people, tall whites come, mixed genes. Now you have the many different groups of white people in that place, as well as colored people. Now, of course, being as though the tall whites are doing the civilizing, meaning the domestication thing, civilizing this indigenous people out now, are the offspring to come from it, civilizing them out. And so now they take on nationalities, things, civilized things. They're no longer indigenous. They are the offspring, are the descendants of the indigenous, as well as the tall whites. And so, of course, the whites kind of get the power, being as though the tall whites is doing the civilizing. And so these white ones, let's say in Russia, you had indigenous men. Then you get the civilizing of these people. And so now you got a bunch of white people and a bunch of colored people. And so these white people, they begin to colonize the other places. Meaning the tall whites are not coming to every continent, but the white offspring between the mixing, they're kind of continuing on with that. And so now when you get the Roman Empire coming into Africa, old Africa, it's a matter of that. Meaning they weren't the tall whites, but just the whites that came from that mixing and merging. And so this just continues on and on. This is what the Vikings are. This is a tall white thing. Now when you're dealing with those tall white men in them far north places that you guys never even heard of. North being, up. Lands or continents going, higher and higher up. When you go north as opposed to south. Now when you get to these tall white people of these far north lands, So some of them are, like I said, chalky white. Some of them are a little darker, blonde, like how we familiar with blondes looking, but all bigger. And of course, you have some blacks too. So it's a deep thing I want you guys to grasp. Now, the chalky ones came. The blonde ones didn't. The chalky ones came and kind of did this. So the blonde ones and the colored, the black ones in those far north lands, they didn't come. The chalky ones came and kind of did all of this. And then you eventually get the others coming. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason. And so this is where you get all that screw up or mix up of, oh, there's aliens and they tall whites. This is a white thing, meaning when y'all see white people today, this is just a glimpse of the past, meaning they are the closest looking to those tall whites that came. And those that you see that's kind of like my shade or darker, they look closer to the indigenous men that were in the continent already. And so it's kind of a matter of that. We are all just a reflection of, indigenous men going civilized. And so it's a process. It's still happening. Meaning those people in North Sentinel Islands, they will eventually be civilized as well. They've civilized the surrounding islands over there. They just having a hard time with that group. And it's because that group know what happened to the surrounding islands. And so you have to just grasp. Now, it's deep when you're dealing with this Ifriqiya thing. Old Africa. Because before these tall white men, all these Romans, or if you're talking about North America, or American times where, Spain came, the Brits. If you go back to before when these people came, and so on every continent you had indigenous men. Now when you're dealing with African continent, you had the indigenous men running around the continent, and you had the Arabs. And so the Arabs was like in between civilized and indigenous. And so they kind of not oppressed the indigenous men of the land, but they kind of exploited the land. You get my point? So before you had white people coming in and oppressing these lands and colonizing them out, the Arabs was kind of like tiptoeing around in the African lands, exploiting the lands, like for the gold, things like this. So being as though the indigenous men are not civilized, the Arabs are kind of civilized. They have an order. They have the worth of things like gold. Indigenous men, that shit don't mean nothing more than a rock. You get it? But for the Arabs, so they kind of know electricity somewhat, and so they can use it. And so this is what I mean. They exploit the land. They live in houses and shit. So they can use the tree wood, and you get my point? They have a better understanding than the indigenous men. And so they kind of like living the life. Meaning the indigenous men don't know what to do with all the shit there. Not everything. I mean, they know what they know, but, civilized men like stupid stuff. Like to wear gold on their neck and weird shit. And so I mean like that. The indigenous men have no use for those type of things that civilized men care about. So the Arabs was kind of enjoying themselves. And so when the Roman Empire first came in, what is this fool's name? Scipio Africanus? When he was ruling, this is early in the hundreds AD times, but, early in that first century or second. He kind of was, when he was ruling, this is how you get all them wars and, as Africa's being taken over by the Roman Empire, you're getting a lot of wars and, back and forth from the Arabs. It's a matter of that, because they like, whoa, y'all about to fuck up. We had a good thing going. Meaning the Arabs weren't really oppressing the indigenous men. They weren't trying to civilize them out. They let them be. And so, it's not right or wrong. It's just like, hey, whatever. No harm done. Whatever. White man come, they civilizing them out. They're making use of the land. This is not good for the Arabs. They like, what the fuck is going on? Like, we had it sweet here where it was never gonna be no wars or nothing. Now they want, you get it? It's like, damn, you fucking up a good thing. And so this is why you kind of always gonna have them issues between Arabs and Europeans. That's why over in the Middle East, they go crazy against each other. It's really that. You got the indigenous men on the land, and before, you could say the Arabs over in that African area, Middle East area, they were the first civilized, in a sense. I use Arabs because that's the word we have for those people in today. But I'm sure they probably went by another, like Arabs, all that come from like Hebrews. So this is what I mean. You could say all those peoples could have been like Hebrews, and then people start separating. Now you got Arabs, but they all kind of descend from the same peoples. And so the Arabs were a little civilized before the indigenous men, so to say. So you could say indigenous men will become civilized on their own, but not that European way, where you kind of just destroy the land and turn it into just concrete and buildings everywhere. Still respecting the life in the land, but becoming civilized. You get it? And so the Arabs in that area, they were like the first like that in the 2nd century AD. And so when the Romans came, it kind of just threw things into a frenzy. So it's a very deep thing I want you guys to grasp. But this is how you kind of get all of that. Meaning, if you're a black person and you feel like I'm an ancestor or a descendant to the indigenous men that were in a place before it was colonized and civilized out, you need not claim a nationality. That goes with civilized, meaning you are claiming what came after the indigenous men were kind of killed off, mixed breeded, and so you are claiming hundreds and hundreds of years of offspring later. By then, they would start to claim a nationality. You get it? If you claim Cherokee, you're claiming after the indigenous men of America was civilized out. Meaning, the Aniawea, but it was really, Aiuia. They were the indigenous people kind of running around. But you could say they were like the Arabs. They were kind of civilized out. Kind of. Like how I said the Arabs were amongst the rest of the indigenous. And so you had more than just the Aniawea. You had others that were like that as well in their area in Americas. Going through their process of kind of civilizing out. And so you have to grasp, when the Europeans came, it just throws a frenzy. That's how you get all the wars. Because you kind of have one group kind of living the life before the rest kind of civilize out naturally. And so to have somebody come interfere with your thing, it kind of throws it off. And so it's a deep thing I want you guys to grasp. It's kind of a matter of that. If you're going to claim indigenous, you cannot claim a nationality. That does not go together. You get it? Hopefully you guys grasp. Because I know you be attached to things, but that does not go together. And so that's why I wanted to explain to you guys how indigenous becomes civilized. And then you guys start to pull for that. Meaning those indigenous men are now civilized, so they call themselves this or that. And you forgetting they were taught all they know to be civilized by those who civilized them out. So the Berber people that were in North America, the Berber people that were running around North Africa, after they were civilized out and shipped to Europe, those that were, over time, they began to get civilized The people there were calling them Maori. And so they went with that. Meaning they learned from those who civilized them out. They learn, they speak the language they speak. So if they calling you Maori and you learning from them, this is how you get Moor. Meaning, of course, later you get the English language. And so Maori is translated into Moor. And so they're speaking English now and they go by that now, Moor. But to claim Moor or any nationality, you have to grasp what you're claiming. You're basically claiming what y'all would call the oppressor. Meaning an indigenous people get civilized out by whoever you want to say. And then they name themselves, whatever they were being called, by those who civilized them out. And so to say you this nationality or that nationality kind of goes against saying you're indigenous. And so it's a deep thing you guys have to grasp. This is why I wanted to explain that to you guys. But the tall white thing is where most people get lost, being as though we have aliens and all this weird talk in today's times. You get a lot of confusion. But truly there is none. You just have that. Before you had all the many different groups of white people, you know, and all the many different groups of colored people, you know, Jamaican, West Indian, any colored people that's civilized, and any white group that's civilized. Before you had any of that, you had the indigenous men of a place and the tall whites. And then from there, you get, like I said, the many different groups of whites and the many different groups of coloreds in that place. And then you can say the whites go out. Some of the blacks go with them. It ain't really no order, but you get my point. Most of the whites, they going. They kind of got the rule in the place. Being as though they kind of resemble the tall whites who are the civilized ones. And we kind of, those that are colored, kind of resemble the indigenous. And so, you just have to use your mind and grasp. It's truly simple. And so that's how that kind of worked out. And so here we are in today's times. With all this confusion, we kind of live in a time where, you know, there's an abundance of information, but y'all don't consider that you have two sides of knowledge, truth and lie. And so there's an abundance of information being pulled out, but you have to grasp what side is it on. And so y'all kind of just grab all of it and just say, I'm going to make sense of all of it. And you cannot mix truth with lie. That is not wisdom. That is just nothing. And so it's a deep thing. I hope you guys grasp. If not, I guess you guys can text me or something and ask your questions. Peace and wisdom.